Black Earth offers a full suite of humic solutions, from high-purity granules to powder, liquid, and soluble formulations, all powered by pure humulite. Trusted by growers worldwide from one of the world's rarest humulite reserves. Grow stronger with the power of Black Earth humulite. Learn more from mine to market by visiting blackearth.com.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Wednesday midweek edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. And also, of course, a big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. If you're listening to the RealAg Radio podcast, you know we've been doing bonus segments. Today will be no different. If you listen to the RealAg Radio podcast, at the end of today's show, you're going to hear Kelvin Heppner talking to Comin from Seeds Canada about a major tariff issue related to the importation of seed canola produced in the U.S. coming into Canada. So there's you're not going to want to miss that very insightful stuff there. Some of the things that Canada's trying to rectify in this trade agreement between Canada and the U.S. by July 21st. For here on Rural Radio 147, today's show is fully loaded. We got a great lineup of guests. We're going to hear from Arlan Suderman of StoneX today, talking markets. We got Anthony Parker from the CFIA, and he's going to talk about not something kind of a little bit broader than CFIA. Anthony's going to talk about it's time to make hay. And it is time to really take that leap forward as a Canadian ag economy and Canadian ag industry and just Canada in general. And kind of fits very much into this thing you've heard a lot here on this show, which is less talk, more time for action. We've talked about growing it. We've talked about producing that hay. Let's get out there and cut it and do something about it. We're also going to hear from Derryn Shrosbree in the final part of our continuity conversation series we've been running. So we'll have that today. And a little bit of wrap up at the end. If you have any feedback on today's show, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Hope you had yourselves a great Canada Day. I know that my family did. My daughter turned 21, which was crazy. Just another reminder that we age creeps up on us, young and old. And of course, we got the July 4th on Friday. So this is kind of one of those odd weeks here at RealAg Radio and Real Agriculture as we, do business and operate on both sides of the border. Holiday on, holiday off. It's just, it's chaos. But hopefully you had yourself a great weekend. A bunch of people had sent me photos and pictures of things they were doing on the farm over the weekend, on the long weekend. And one of the highlights was my wife and I were driving and we were listening to the Blue Jays game on Canada Day, and they said, "Hey, text us, and we're going to read out a bunch of people where they're listening from during the broadcast." So I did that. So my wife got called out on the radio, which she was. I did it for her. She wasn't as excited as I was, but it was pretty cool to hear her name on the Blue Jays broadcast. A big Blue Jays, big win versus the Yankees. Let's go! Yes, one game out of first place. Those Toronto Blue Jays. It's season's turning out right now better than any of us really expected. Let's hope that the boys can keep her rolling. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, we've got Arlan Suderman of StoneX talking markets right after this. Today is the launch of Invigor Gold, hybrid Brassica gensea, not in the traditional canola areas. Joined by Stuart Brandt, global head of canola breeding. So gensea has been around for a while. This isn't your grandpa's gensea.
We've been able to improve the bottom end of the yield to make it more competitive, but we've also improved it so when times are better and growers are getting some moisture and they have maybe a little bit better organic matter content, the yields can compete with the best Napus varieties. Even in a good year, these will compete very well, and often that was a challenge with some of the early gensea, that work that had been done. In the traditional, what I would call canola growing area, Napus still outperforms gensea, but if we get into the brown soil zones, areas like this, and there would be some areas in and around North Dakota where this would be a very good fit and be competitive with Napus in good times and outperform it in tough times.
Invigor Gold, hybrid Brassica gensea, launching in Montana and the Northern Plains 2027, Central Plains in 2029, and hopefully Canada sometime in the early 2030s. Agriculture.bsf.us.
Since 2014, FP Genetics has led the way in bringing hybrid fall rye to Canadian farms. As the original purveyor, we've built decades of experience and trust right here at home. Canadian-owned, farmer-focused, and grounded in real agronomic knowledge, FP Genetics is your go-to source for rye. The future of rye in Canada starts with experience, and experience starts with FP Genetics. Visit fpgenetics.ca today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Let's talk markets here on this Wednesday. We're joined by Arlan Suderman with StoneX. Hey, Arlan, how are we doing?
We're doing well. It's been a busy 6 months. Hard to believe 2025 is halfway over already.
Yeah, no kidding. Hey, well, yeah, I'm with you. It finally feels like summer here in parts of Western Canada. We could use a little bit more moisture for sure. What's been the biggest surprise for you from a market standpoint in the first 6 months?
I think how resilient the economy has been overall, and that's the underlying economy. There's certainly been a lot of turbulence, a lot of uncertainty. But when we look at some of the economic numbers for the United States, we're looking at a stock market setting record highs over the past week with all the uncertainty. And we know the business is holding back. Just look at some of the employment numbers. They're holding back hiring because of the uncertainty of the tariff situation, the uncertainty of whether we're going to see the tax cuts of 2017 expire at the end of the year. Consumers are holding back for the same reason. But yet the economy as a whole is fairly resilient right now and still hanging on. That's probably the biggest surprise.
Yeah, still, obviously there are some tariffs that have been put in place, but we haven't seen the full implementation. Of course, there is a deadline here coming up here within the next week on that, I guess, that second wave of, or that pushback on the deadline with all the different countries. President Trump has said that he will not budge on that. At least that's what he said on Friday. We haven't seen inflation really pick up. It's been pretty moderate, but there is concern about the job market, though.
Yeah, with all the headlines about inflation, we really saw the consumer pull back in April. We've had a little bit of a bounce in consumer confidence. Consumer spending goes with consumer sentiment. And so you would think, well, based on the consumer surveys, they were expecting year ahead inflation to be at 7% initially. That's pulled back a little bit now, but overall, that's not what you generally get from tariffs because the consumer has X amount of disposable income. And so while some products go up, others that are produced domestically do not. And so they tend to, if they have to spend more for what they want that's imported with tariff, they spend less for others. Now, that's slows the economy down, but it doesn't give you the big jump of inflation that people fear or expect. It does give you a slowdown in economy. So we really haven't seen, I do think we will see a little bit more of a rise in inflation going forward, but not to the levels that were initially feared.
Yeah, one of the things that all the tariff talk has definitely had an impact on is that U.S. dollar. Definitely has shown some weakness. What implications does that have on ag commodity exports?
Our biggest problem in exporting ag commodities, particularly corn and soybeans, has not been, and even wheat, has not been the tariffs. It has been the dollar and currencies of our competing countries and those countries that buy. And specifically, Brazil has taken market share away from the United States in corn and soybeans big time. And if you go back and track, you can find that relationship from when the Brazilian real began to weaken right around 2011 or so. That's when they started accelerating their expansion of area planted, destroying more acres, mostly brushland. I know some rainforest was destroyed as well. That's a separate issue. But mostly the millions and millions and millions of acres of brushland that they have that can be converted to cropland and continue to have to expand. And as long as that currency in Brazil is weak relative to the dollar, they're going to do it. And as long as that's the case, then when China and other customers go to buy, currency exchange rates are going to make that cheaper to buy than what it is from the United States. So the weaker U.S. dollar does help us be able to compete more in the commodity market.
Now, one of the challenges, though, if the Fed starts to cut rates in the back half here of 25, does that weaken that U.S. dollar index even further?
It does relative to what's happening in other countries, most specifically Europe. Can the euro actually sustain a rally. If it can, then the dollar can go lower, the U.S. dollar. So it comes down to how good a job Europe does with its economy. And of course, a big part of that is tied to the tariff war there as well and how that plays out. But in order for the U.S. dollar to go weaker, we need to have the euro be able to strengthen.
What do you see happening here with this deadline on tariffs with countries like obviously with the EU, with Japan, obviously Canada's in that mix. We saw big news on Canada on Friday, but what do you think we're going to see the full implementation of tariffs, or what do you think is going to be the outcome?
I think it'll be mixed. I was getting some optimism from Europe that there seemed to be some determination to reach an agreement, but the differences between Europe and the United States are still very stark. But again, that's part of the negotiation process. If you're negotiating effectively, you're holding a hard line right up until the deadline to see which party is that deadline more important to. And you're using that deadline. It's kind of like the game of football. You're using the sideline to your advantage. Though the sideline here is that expiration date, so to speak. And so both sides are going to look like they're far apart until the 11th hour. But I do think Europe and the United States are still very far apart, very values driven there. I'm a little bit more optimistic now about progress with Canada and being able to agree agreement with Canada. I think we'll have an agreement with Mexico. I keep hearing talk about good progress with India, and I think we probably will. Japan probably as well. South Korea could be a problem with the change in the government overall. So I think there will be some countries that sign agreements. There will be those who we do not. And President Trump will say, we've made sufficient progress. We'll give them an extension. They're negotiating in good faith. And there will be others that say they're not negotiating in good faith. We're just going to raise the tariffs on them. And so it'll be a mixture.
Yeah. I guess what are we at the end of the day, Arlan, what's being negotiated? Like it's being communicated from the White House as a deal. But in some cases, there's comprehensive trade agreements already in place with countries like Canada, or there was a major deal done with Japan in the first Trump administration that yielded some really good numbers for the U.S. So what is this? A framework? How would you describe it?
Well, first of all, we have to go back and say normally presidents negotiate trade deals with fast track authority from Congress that allows them to negotiate a deal, and then Congress can only give an up or down vote on it. It cannot amend it in any way, which really complicates the matters when you have a committee of 435 people trying to negotiate a trade deal. Fast track authority has been renewed constantly until we got to the Biden administration where it was allowed to expire. Biden didn't even ask for it to be extended. So President Trump doesn't have fast track authority. So he can't get a trade deal through this Congress. There's no way he can. So what he's basically done is saying, I'm using my authority under the Emergency Powers Act to put a tariff on you to get you to change what you do. And if you change what you do, we'll lift the tariffs that we have on you. And so his goal is to overall reduce tariffs and reduce non-tariff restrictions, which if everybody would go down to zero tariffs and zero trade restrictions, you'd probably have global economic growth at a tremendous pace. But even President Trump has his areas that he wants to protect for national security reasons, what he deems. The steel and aluminum, which is a big issue between the United States and Canada. He sees that as a national security issue. So he's not going to negotiate those tariffs all the way down to zero. He's going to have some baseline level he's willing to negotiate them down to. He likes the revenue generated by tariffs. So what level is that? Is that 5%, 10%, 4%? We don't know what that is. That will be in there at some point. But in the end, since these are not congressionally approved agreements, when President Trump leaves office, they could all go out the window unless the next president is going to use the same emphasis and force in order to keep them in play.
Yeah, I guess. Well, there's not just the trade deals, but there's a lot. With the high use of executive orders that we've seen from the past number of administrations,
Yes.
there's a lot that fall into that web for sure. Hey, big news at the end of last week. USDA Secretary Brooke Rollins talking about, I guess, a tempered reopening of Mexican cattle coming into the U.S. What impact does that have on the markets here?
Feeder cattle market collapsed because that announcement came at a time when speculative funds essentially had record long positions in the feeder cattle market and very large positions in the fat cattle market. I think we saw an overreaction overall because I think the flow of cattle, and mind you, at one point, feeder cattle moving across the border north into the United States was nearly 30,000 per week, 30,000 head per week. It's been zero now for quite some time. So we're going to start seeing a trickle to start with. The question is, how quickly does that increase? And I think the market overreacted because I think it's initially going to be slow. But Secretary Rollins has shown some flexibility here to work with Mexico. And Mexico, I think Mexico's president has done an outstanding job of working with this administration, handled it very well. And so if she continues to be happy with what Mexico is doing, that trickle flow could increase to a much faster flow. That's what the market's reacting to. I think we'll see a comeback something in between. We still have tight protein supplies in the United States. And with all I've said about consumer sentiment and consumer confidence and consumer spending, the consumer is still spending on beef. They're spending more money on beef and pork and poultry this year than they did a year ago. And I'm not just talking about money spent. I'm talking about volume of meat consumed. Latest data we have showed 5% increase in volume of beef, the highest priced meat, versus a year before. So the consumer is still buying, but we don't have the animals here.
Arlan, how though? Like that's the head scratcher, right? We talk about, the impact on the housing market with, where consumers are, consumers' willingness to invest. We look at, what's going on in the auto sector, but beef, it just seems to be this anomaly where people just spend regardless. How is, it seems to defy economics.
Inelastic is what we call it in economics. Price doesn't negatively impact demand, and it seems to be because of all the emphasis on protein-based diets in the United States, and particularly among the younger generation. They want their protein, and price doesn't matter, even if they have to cut other things in their life.
Yeah. Hey, want to finish up with crops. We had the USD report on Monday. Crop conditions out as well. This crop is off to a pretty decent start. What gets in front of it? Provide some analysis here.
Well, I think the 4th of July holiday weekend is a big one that typically is the one where traders come back from that holiday and they look at the weather models that look 15 days out. That takes them past the midway point of pollination. If that 15-day outlook continues to be favorable with moderate temperatures and periodic showers, then they're going to assume an above-trend yield and ending stocks above 2 billion bushels, and we'll likely see a lot of selling. If, in fact, it flips and we actually see the hot, dry risks that have been in the 16 to 45-day outlook for the past 2.5 months move forward into the 2-week outlook, then it'll be buy all the corn and soybeans that they can. And so that'll be a very pivotal time, I think, this week coming out of this weekend for both corn and soybeans. Soybeans are hanging on a little bit better now because it's looking like we're going to have a strong biofuel program. Exports are still a question. But with the reduced area planted to soybeans this year, we're still very vulnerable to weather, and the weather risks for that are late July and August. So we have more time, so the fund's not quite ready to short the soybeans.
Hey, last question. You mentioned biofuels. How critical is it that we have EPA and in this budget reconciliation bill, this talk of domestic feedstocks being North American feedstocks? Obviously, that's a play against a product coming in from China. But looking at this biofuel feedstock market as being North American, how critical is that?
Oh, I think it's very critical overall for being able to hit the objectives, because we will increase crush dramatically of soybeans here in the States, but we have limited capacity. And so I think the canola is going to be an essential part of that, along with some of the other feedstocks, but keeping out the used cooking oil, which is probably palm oil with a French fry thrown into it to make it test for used cooking oil coming from China, I think it is critical to support agriculture in North America. And I think it shows the spirit of cooperation that we see in Congress between the United States and Canada. Hopefully that spirit will spread.
Hey, great stuff. Hey, Arlan, thanks a lot for joining us here today.
Thank you, Shaun.
Hey, that is Arlan Suderman of StoneX, one of the best on all things ag, economics, and the commodity markets, what's going on. We'll be right back on RealAg Radio right after this.
Right now, Saskatchewan wheat producers like you see a $33 return for every dollar invested in wheat breeding. And because of your contribution, Sask Wheat can drive innovation by funding research and initiatives that make wheat profitable and sustainable for generations to come. Varietal improvements, including better yields, are all made possible by you. See your impact and how we support it at every step at saskwheat.ca.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Mazik Seeds and Lalamon Plant Care.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is a video series that showcases the latest in canola research and production agronomy. Learn from some of the best at your own pace through quick and timely producer-focused videos available on our YouTube channel. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is the quickest way to keep up to date on all the latest in canola production. Boost your canola IQ with the Canola School, brought to you by BASF, and visit canolaschool.com.
You know, we continue to see forms of digitization in agriculture. One of the ways that you do that is through Ag Expert. Deep in the fields and deep in the data to back up your decisions on the farm. You can get started at agexpert.ca. Joined right now by Anthony Parker. He is the Commissioner of Plant Breeders' Rights with the CFIA. Anthony, how are we doing?
Very well, Shaun. How are you doing? Thanks so much for having me on your show.
Well, hey, it's great to have you here. And this is good because I'll be honest with you. No, what Anthony did was he wrote, now this is not something we see regularly out of someone that's working at CFIA or the government, but you wrote an opinion column. And it's interesting. It got a ton of comments and likes and interaction on LinkedIn. I saw it. Okay. I read it. I was like, man, this is pretty good. I like this. A good message. I had you got some fans out there, my friend. I don't know how many people emailed me that link and said, you got to talk to Anthony about that. Have you seen this? You got to talk to him. So good job on sparking some engagement and get people thinking. So the title is, It's Time to Start Making Hay. What do you mean by that?
Well, I guess first of all, caution anyone who has a bad evening reading through some material and then decides to whip out a post, based on frustration. But it sort of stems from this idea that since 2016, we've been faced with report after report lauding Canada's agriculture potential. Shaun, you've seen them, right? The Barton report has come out. And, RBC did one, John Stackhouse a while ago, and we just see a lot of them saying, there's unlimited potential here. But a decade later, when you start measuring up to see how we performed, it hasn't been that great. So the rhetoric has been up here, but the results have been fairly low. And then the final kicker was someone that you have on the show quite often, who I know quite well, Tyler McCann, so Cappy, said, okay, what's the greatest risk to, a prosperous future for Canadian agriculture? And they said, it's the policy and regulatory environment. And I'm like, are you kidding me? It's not the weather. It's not trade barriers. The one thing we have the most control over is the biggest threat to our future. And I'm like, something's got to change here. So I outlined, 4 simple strategies that could be implemented. They're not new. They've been on the books for a long time. And if we get that, that would be a start. So it's like, it's time to make hay, everyone. It's not time to start looking at the forecast again. It's time to start seeing some action, to start doing things. So I was kind of surprised at the response it got. But here we are. I'm glad to talk.
Yeah. So what are the 4 things?
So, okay. So, they all are sort of things that are tangible and can be done quite quickly. Cut the red tape. So anything in the regulatory framework that delays innovation or discourages investment, have a look at it and see if you can get rid of it. The next thing is recognize regulatory equivalency. So we have products coming into Canada that are assessed by other jurisdictions. It could be the EU, it could be Japan, it could be Australia. And if we trust their systems, why don't we just make it easier to get those products in? If they have equivalency for what they do to why are we making people repeat things? Accelerate digitization is a big one. I'm working in an office, we're still largely paper-based. I can't believe that, right? So there's this level of frustration on behalf of the applicant when they have to put things in that are paper-based, and on our office that we can't be efficient what we do. So any tools that can accelerate digitization in the sector and in the regulatory framework, you got to go for it. And then lastly, this is sort of new, is we really have to take intellectual property seriously. It is going into the future the number one most valuable business asset that any business can own. We haven't paid attention to that historically in Canada. We're the choppers of wood and the hewers of water. We're just about resources, but we have to get this movement into this creativity, this innovation-based economy. We have to play catch up in that area. So we have to take IP rights. So those were the 4.
I'm just curious. Yeah, they're not complicated. On the intellectual property rights, just curious, because you live in this world. This, plant breeders' rights. This is your ecosystem. Is that a comment on agriculture, or is that a comment on, is that a comment on Canadian agriculture, or is that a comment on Canadians' view of intellectual property rights in general?
I think in general. I mean, we see it manifested in agriculture, but I don't think we're alone. We tend to be late adopters of this. We tend to be a little bit reticent about making the shifts. The problem with that is when we sit back and wait for things to happen, the investment, the innovation goes to other places, and those places are our competitors, right? So they cut our grass for us, right? We don't get the benefits of it.
So you mentioned policy and regulation environment is the biggest threat to agriculture. You agree with what McCann says at Cappy?
Yeah.
What's one example of a regulation or policy that's actively holding farmers back right now?
Well, I think, again, back to my world, Shaun, the first time I spoke with you was about 10 years ago. You cornered me at Ag Tech in Edmonton. We were moving forward legislative amendments to our Plant Breeders' Rights Act. We were finally complying with this international treaty called UPOV, so the most recent version. We became a signatory to that, and it took us 26 years. 26 years is the last developed nation to join it. We need to do better than that. We need to be keeping pace with our competitors. So there's one example is you can't be late adopters for things that will improve the business environment. You have to be early adopters so you can draw the innovation towards you and away from elsewhere. So we're in a situation, we've updated our law. Okay, that was great. We did it. But when we did it, we joined at the bare minimum, right? Not like someone like the European Union or Japan that went in excess of this. We joined at the bare minimum. So we have some regulatory amendments that are in play that will get us up to that level. But, we have to be early adopters on these things. We can't just sit back and wait for other competitors to make the move.
Now, you have sat in more policy and regulation meetings in your career, Anthony, than I ever care to.
Okay.
Seriously. But, what you just said, that's one example. There is a cascading amount of examples. Exactly what you just said. So I think it's a little bit of culture. There's like this, there's more at work here. We heard even during the last Canadian election, a lot of focus on action. And I guess, is it our risk adverseness? Like if we actually, if we were like, those other jurisdictions and we just went and did it, there could be some unintended consequences. We have to, are we like paralysis by analysis, or what's happening here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it, right? Is you can see that with that whole stream of reports coming out since 2016, which is, if we just do enough talking about it, maybe the problem will fix itself. So I think there's part of that. Okay. I think we are risk averse. That's not necessarily a bad thing. We need to kind of do analysis and we need to figure things out, but you can't do that forever. There's a time for action, right? And sometimes doing nothing is the worst decision. If you do something wrong, well, at least you know. If you do something right, well, at least you didn't miss the opportunity cost of sitting on your hands. So I think that's part of it, right? I think we also have a bit of a culture, and we talked a little bit over email about this, is that we view ourselves as gatekeepers, right? On the regulatory framework. You have to get everything perfectly right to make sure all the boxes are ticked, and as opposed to kind of viewing ourselves as a partner or an ally to agriculture specifically, which is to say, if we're confronted with an applicant, it could be a farmer or it could be ag industry, why don't we see ourselves as someone who's invested in their success and helping them along their way, right? As opposed to saying, hang on, until you meet these requirements, you're not getting anywhere, right? So it's a different mindset. It's a cultural shift in government, which I think needs to happen.
Yeah. And I think, when we have these kind of discussions, what people can fall into the finger pointing where it's like, wow, it's farmers are doing this or they're not doing that. Or if the government would just get out of the way, there's all these different things I hear all the time. The reality is, all the different stakeholders, private industry, government, farmers, whoever, stakeholder, everybody plays a role in this and making this better.
Yeah, they do, right? So one of the worst mistakes you make is when you don't have a touchstone to the sector to find out exactly what their needs are, right? We've seen this before. Government goes off in a direction and, thinks it understands the situation. Hey, was anyone part of the value creation consultations that I was? Remember that, Shaun? Yeah. That was a contentious issue, right? But understanding exactly what the needs are is critical. So it's having those conversations with the various stakeholders in the sector and saying, what are the things that are getting in your way? Let's understand those. And once we understand them, let's start working on fixes for them, right? It doesn't have to be an overly complex strategy. And I think that's one of the problems is we're waiting for the grand unifying theory of everything. You know this, I know this. As soon as you just start taking steps, moving in the right direction, all it does is open new possibilities, right? But you'll never get to those possibilities until you open the door. That's why I'm suggesting 4 simple things. Let's just start working on them. And as we go, there'll be the confidence in the sector to take on more and more and more.
I'm going to ask you a question. I don't want to get you in trouble, but just, between you and me.
And all your listeners.
I'm sure you had.
Do you have any jobs coming open?
Yeah. What's been the response from your colleagues? Because I think a lot of times people have a misconception about how people inside government think about some of these things. And so I'm just curious, is you're at the water cooler, if we still do that nowadays?
Yeah, honestly, I have to say, I've been in the public service for 30 plus years now, so I'm getting along in the tooth. But I have not run into a single individual that doesn't want to do good for the sector, right? They want to see a successful agriculture sector. They want to be part of it. I think it requires that culture shift that we talked about. But it also requires getting that feedback. So touchstone to the industry, finding out what the issues are and seeing how they can be in a supportive role to that. So I think it's there. I think it's in there. And I think, the throne from the speech that had a clear tie to agriculture, and I'll read it out for you here. And it said, essentially we need to start giving farmers the tools and the trade opportunities for them to be successful globally so they can compete and win. And I take that as a clear sign from my bosses up above me, be it, a prime minister, a minister, or president of my organization, that you working at the coalface need to start thinking about ways to make this happen. So you need to start thinking about ways where you can support the agricultural industry in those regulatory services so they can win and compete on a global stage.
All good columns need a closing. And I'll read what you wrote, and I'll give you the final word here. The stakes are high, and the rewards even higher. Farmers make up less than 2% of Canada's population, yet they form the foundation of a $150 billion agri-food economy, contributing 7% of our national GDP and powering one of the most critical export engines. They deserve a policy and regulatory framework that supports their ambitions, not one that obstructs it. The stakes are high, Anthony, and the rewards are even higher. Very well put.
It's okay to pick winners, right? It's okay to pick winners. I believe our agricultural sector is a winner. We need to get behind it and we need to support it. 100%.
Hey, man, I really appreciate you joining us here today. That great piece. We are going to post it along with on realagriculture.com along with this interview. So thank you so much for joining us here today.
My pleasure. Let's not let it be 10 years before we talk again.
I promise it won't be.
All right. Take care.
With volatile markets and rising costs, now's your chance to be a part of the solution. It's time to secure your future with Genesis Fertilizers. Gain control and ensure access to locally produced nitrogen. Act now to protect your farm's future for generations. Visit genesisfertilizers.com to learn more. Back with more of RealAg Radio right after this.
Soil health is under pressure, but real solutions start below the surface. Black Earth offers a full suite of humic solutions, from high-purity granules to powder, liquid, and soluble formulations, all powered by pure Humulite. Formulated for performance, backed by consistency, trusted by growers worldwide from one of the world's rarest reserves. Grow stronger with the power of Black Earth Humulite. Learn more from Mine to Market at blackearth.com.
It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
Welcome to another episode. It's actually the final episode of Continuity Conversations, and I'm joined by 33.7 CEO Derryn Shrosbree. Derryn, how are we doing?
Good, thanks. Shaun, how are you?
I'm doing great. Okay, so today we're kind of, as you've been following along in the steps, everybody, you've probably noticed that these aren't steps in isolation. These are steps that all very much connect to each other. You can see if you don't do things at the front end, for example, know the value of your farm, you're kind of shooting in the dark, so to speak. You're flying blindly. You're going to get to step 5 and 6 and trying to put up, whole life insurance and trying to set up the estate and off-farm, on-farm kids. And you realize you're working with the wrong numbers, which can be just a disaster at the end of the day. So if you've missed any of these steps, encourage you to go back and listen to them in order would probably be best. So step 7. This is, ask yourself the question, does 12 work-free harvests sound good to you? So the idea here is the city harvest. Derryn, curious, what exactly are you talking about?
Right, the city harvest. Well, being a farmer myself, I do like harvest. My favorite time. A lot of people like seeding, but harvest gets a lot of the attention. So the city harvest is what I like to think of as, how do we get paid as farmers? Well, we get paid when we do a successful year and we have the crop and the harvest comes in, grain's in the bin, we sell grain, happy days. So we do that generally once or twice a year. If you're cutting hay or whatever, it's a couple more, et cetera, et cetera. Quota's a little different, but that's how we get paid. We get paid on production. We get paid to produce things, right? Produce generally food that other people eat. So that's how we get paid. That's our harvest, right? There is a way to use the city for harvesting as well. And I like the use of the word macabre because you used that last session. This might sound macabre, but how do we harvest the city?
And you're not talking urban farming here.
No, I'm using the farming metaphor, but there's no farming involved. I'm using the metaphor because how would you farm a city? How would you make money from it?
I just figured it. I actually just sort of figured out what you're talking about here. And this is a big gap for a lot of people where I think I have figured it out. All of the farmers' wealth is inside that farming operation. And when all of that wealth is inside the farming operation, that farm is laid with the sole responsibility of trying to take care of the family in the longer run. And it's been a natural strategy to just reinvest. But what if we created some wealth outside of the farming operation? And I think you're talking about real estate.
Yeah, I am. For sure I am. And it's timely because our friend down south, he likes to wake up in the morning and create chaos. There's a lot of farmers that I chat to that this tariff thing has not been good, right? Who knows what's going to happen with protectionism, tariffs? I like Fortress North America, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of interesting things going on. But would it be prudent as a businessman, because farmers are businessmen, business people, would it be prudent to have the option of diversifying your asset base? Right? Diversification is good, a little bit, right? So you hit the nail on the head. It is real estate, and it's in urban areas, but it's very specific. And it is very specific. It's not just go out and buy real estate. So what we can do is we can diversify the asset class of the farm, right? This also leads to, once again, if you go back a step to step 6, continuity planning for on-farm versus off-farm children, right?
Yep.
So what if we could create an asset class that is funded by the farm, that creates an asset class off-farm that we can then couple with a bit of life insurance, a bit of the off-farm asset, and the off-farm kids get that asset. Now, you mentioned last time the boy or the girl that gets the farm, they have an ongoing revenue stream. But the off-farm kids, you die, they get $1 million and it's over. But how about if you solve that? How about if they got paid every month, once a month, every month in perpetuity? And what is that called? That's called?
Well, cash flow?
Yeah, rent. It's called rent, right? So what we do is we go out and we buy or build apartment buildings, right? So minimum 10 units. So let's just use easy math. So we build a 10-unit building. So there's 10 people that pay rent every single month in that building. We have a construction company. We have a property management company. It's vertically integrated so that you don't ever get a call about the dishwasher being broken, right? You take money, let's say it's $100,000. You send $100,000. We build the building. 18 months from shovel in the ground, you get the money back. You actually get the $100,000 back because we refinance through a thing called CMHC. So the CMHC, CMHC, right? It's fairly well known. So CMHC gives you the $100,000 back, but we keep the asset. So now we own a 10-unit apartment building, and we have none of our own money in that building. We get the $100,000 back. Once we have the $100,000 back and we still own the 10 units, what are we going to do with that $100,000?
We're going to use it as
buy another one.
Yeah,
we can use it as income, or we can just buy another building, because we're constantly rinsing and repeating using the same $100,000 to go out and buy apartment buildings. So if you like to buy an apartment building within 2 years, it's 18 months, you get the money back. You now have an apartment building. We do it again and again and again. So in 10 years, you can own 5 apartment buildings. That's 50 doors. So 10 units per easy math, right? That's 50 doors. That's 50 humans giving you rent every single month. As an off-farm child, You should be very happy with that because you're getting money every single month for the rest of your life.
That could be more
That's
consistent than the farming.
Way more consistent than farming. You're farming the city. Like the people that are paying rent, that's your quota. That's the hens laying eggs, right?
Now you said, I like the metaphor. You did say that for the real estate play, the farm corporation makes the investment, but do we want to get that ownership of the asset outside of the farming operation into NewCo?
100%. 100%.
I'm one step. I'm doing good here. I'm learning on the
great,
go, but this is fun. Okay, go. So why NewCo?
This is a passing grade. You're doing well. Because you hit the nail on the head. Because we don't want it in the farm corporation. We don't want that because then it's going to be lumped in with the farm corporation. Yeah. So what we do is, remember the old tax-free zone? Remember that thing where you take the $100,000, you send it to an insurance company, then you get it back as a personal loan? Remember that personal loan situation?
Yeah.
You use the personal loan, which is in your name, like it's Shaun Haney. It's not Shaun Haney Ag or RealAg Radio. It's Shaun Haney. Shaun Haney sends the $100,000 to buy an apartment building in his name. You own it outside of the farm in your name. So when you die, those assets go straight to your kids. Or you can start doing other things while you're alive with those assets for the off-farm children. So yes, you absolutely, you're starting to put the dots together, which is kind of cool to see.
I know several farms that did this with commercial real estate in different cities. They haven't gone apartments, but they've gone they did it with commercial real estate, and it honestly provided an immense, something that seemed like small and sort of, and it ended up being a pretty substantial property management company in a couple of examples because they chipped away at it.
Yeah. So our company, what we do, we have 84 buildings, 84 apartment buildings, 560 doors. The average rent of those doors is $1,500 a month. You can see that's a big number, right? So that's what you're doing. You're setting up, without owning a property management company, without owning a construction company, you're setting up all the beautiful part, which is just the harvest. You don't have to own all the equipment and do the seeding and stuff. You just own the harvest, right? We do the rest. So that's interesting. So it's very, very nice to get a city harvest going with these apartment buildings that are personally owned, and you can shift it to your off-farm children as and when you like.
Yeah.
And don't forget, you're constantly reusing the same amount of money. That $100,000, we're just recycling it again and again and again. So that creates large amounts of off-farm wealth, diversifies your asset base, looks after your estate planning for your off-farm children, and just generally creates a whole bunch of money. Because if you look at it from let's say there's 10 units and there's $2,000 in rent. That's $20,000 a month, $240,000 a year. That's decent cash flow right there. You times that by 10 buildings, you get $2.4 million. Like it starts getting meaningful pretty quick.
It does. Just curious why you went the path of, you believe in apartment buildings, like residential real estate versus, say, commercial real estate, or does it have to be one or the other?
My opinion is that commercial real estate is tricky in that most people are buying online. There's less of the shopping experience. So commercial real estate is, in my opinion, higher risk than residential because every single person needs somewhere to live. And in Canada, there's a lot of people that need places to live. We have a shortage of housing. We do not have a shortage of strip malls. Some of those strip malls go under and they turned into apartment buildings, right? Mm-hmm. So I believe, this is an opinion, I believe that the lowest risk asset in Canada from a real estate perspective is multi-units, so 10 and above, commercial style. That's why we do that. And then I've only done this for 14 years, but in 14 years, we've accumulated 84 buildings. So something's working, right?
Yeah. And with the housing shortage, like that kind of, I get your path there. That does make some that does make some sense to me from that perspective.
Yeah, and just bring it back to farming. It's like, what problem are we trying to solve? Like, I'm not trying to do this just to create wealth, although that's nice. I'm trying to solve a specific problem. One, estate equalization. How do I do it? Let's say, for example, Shaun, you're uninsurable. Let's say you're a 70-year-old farmer. We go for medicals, and you're medically uninsurable. So now it comes back to, okay, I've got to cut up the farm, or I've got to go and get a bank loan, or I do nothing. Once again, I'm stuck because I cannot figure out the off-farm children's wealth. Well, you can now. So if you're uninsurable, which some people are, unfortunately, we can use this as a strategy to get your kids, the off-farm kids, money in a tax-efficient manner, right? Because that's very, very tax-efficient, because ultimately we run the building so that there's the rent roll is paying the mortgage. So we don't take income from the buildings, because then you tax that 54%. What we do is we wait for the value of the building to go up, double, etc. Then we sell the building, and then that money gets taxed at 25%, which is capital gains, which is fine. And then the delta, whatever's left over, that goes to your off-farm children, right? So that's the last way to estate equalize is a little bit of insurance, a little bit of apartment buildings. But if I'm not insurable, what other option do I have? Let's go buy apartment buildings in your personal name.
Cool. Hey, Derryn, thanks a lot for joining us here today. Really appreciate it.
It's my absolute pleasure, Shaun. Always a pleasure. Thanks, mate. Take care.
That's Derryn Shrosbree with 33.7. Encourage you to go to RealAgriculture.com and check out that entire 7-part series. Great stuff from Derryn. If you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@RealAgriculture.com. You know, Genesis Fertilizers is making real progress toward providing reliable, locally produced fertilizer. Join the ownership group and protect your bottom line. Learn more at GenesisFertilizers.com. We'll be back with more of RealAg Radio right after this. Built on over 100 years of seed innovation and unwavering commitment to farmers, Pioneer 100 Series canola hybrids deliver a step change in yield performance and agronomic traits. This isn't just better canola, it's different canola. Pioneer 100 Series. Contact your local Pioneer sales representative or visit pioneer.com/100series to learn more today.
How's your seed quality? What should you treat with? What about herbicide carryover and environmental concerns? Spring is here, and you've got a lot of things to think about in regards to your pulse crop. The Pulse School on Real Agriculture has information and advice for all these questions and more to help you navigate this season. Brought to you by BASF. Pulse School episodes are available at pulseschool.com, realagriculture.com, or as a podcast on your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. You know, lots to discuss today. This is going to be a busy end to the week, I can tell. From nutrient management to the latest weather, market, and ag trends, The Dirt, an economics podcast, is your place for farm-smart topics that boost your profitability. Join Mike Howell on Season 3 of The Dirt podcast, available now at nutrient-economics.com. Well, since we had the conversation with Arlan Suderman of StoneX, the U.S. has struck a trade deal with Vietnam. Now, details are kind of pending, but sources are telling Jim Wiesmeyer, DC policy analyst, who we frequently hear on this show, the agreement will implement a scaled tariff system for Vietnamese goods based on domestic content with stricter rules of origin to address transshipment and the Chinese component and use of Chinese components. In return for averting tariff hikes, Vietnam will lower tariffs on U.S. goods, expand purchases of American agriculture and energy products, and ease non-tariff trade barriers. The outcome delivers immediate relief for Vietnam export-driven economy while reinforcing the Trump administration's aggressive use of tariff leverage to secure U.S. trade objectives. Of course, we'll have more as the week progresses, as details try to come out on that. We're still kind of waiting for some details on that UK deal that's from a couple months back. Vietnam is definitely a big market for Canada and the U.S. when it comes to agricultural exports, definitely looked upon as an opportunity for growth and a place to do more business as we both countries try to diversify themselves away from being so reliant on Chinese purchases. So we'll have more on that as the week goes on. If you have any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Maybe you got some thoughts on Canada repealing that digital services tax that was such a big deal between Canada and the U.S. Friday, President Trump says, listen, negotiations cease to exist. They are over. We'll talk about Canadian tariffs next week. And then Saturday, totally reversal, change of heart. Canada says, you know what, that digital services tax, no, we don't need to do that. And negotiations are back on. The story in the Globe and Mail today, Canada is still looking to survive with no flat tariff, which would be a real win. And I'm sure there are other countries really cheerleading for Canada's ability to achieve that, to show that it can be done. If you have any feedback, like I said, Haney at RealAgriculture.com. You can also call the Real Ag Feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag Radio. Stay tuned. If you're listening to the podcast, you're going to hear Lauren Comin from Seeds Canada talk about some tariff issues around seed canola. But for everybody else, thanks so much for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag Radio. Welcome to the bonus here on Real Ag Radio. Of course, every Friday we've been doing a bonus segment pretty consistently. Try to extend the conversation, and there's been some heated debates and definitely some disagreement, and that's all good, continuing the conversation. During the week here, though, opportunity to squeeze in some more content, some stuff that we can't get into the show on Rural Radio 147. But I wanted to play this interview for you. Now, we talk a lot about tariffs and some of the impact on agriculture. We're going to hear Kelvin talk to Lauren Comin of Seeds Canada, specifically about the importation of seed canola, hybrid seed canola that's produced in the U.S. and is going to be imported into Canada that could face some tariffs, and that's going to have an impact on your farm because that's going to impact the price that you pay for seed canola. And I know you're not going to like that out there in a farming country. And what's specific about this is not just easy to be like, okay, we should just bring that seed production back into Canada. It's not that easy, okay, because we're producing hybrid seed, very location specific. Climate, isolation are two of the main factors. So let's hear the conversation that Kelvin Heppner had with Lauren Comin of Seeds Canada.
For Real Agriculture, I'm Kelvin Heppner. The effects of U.S. tariffs in general have maybe not been as significant as feared or possible when they were rolled out back in February-March timeframe. But there are certain products coming into Canada that are still subject to tariffs, especially the Canadian counter tariffs. And joining us to discuss here on Real Ag, I'm pleased to welcome Lauren Comin, Director of Policy at Seeds Canada. Thanks for joining us once again today, Lauren.
Hi, Kelvin. Thanks for having me.
So how are tariffs affecting the seed side of things right now? And in particular, I guess, the Canadian government's counter tariffs that were implemented in retaliation for the Trump administration's tariffs back in early March?
So it's been a pretty rocky road for the seed sector. I know it's been a rocky road for everyone, but, the seed sector, we've had a number of products that, came in and out of concern. When the first counter tariff list, so that's the $30 billion list, was released from the government on March 4th, you would have seen low uric acid rape or colza seed. If you look at that HS code, 1205.10.00, that's actually the HS code for canola seed. And when we say canola seed, usually, we're talking about commodity. But because canola seed for sowing is covered at the at the 8-digit HS code level by that HS code on the list, canola seed for sowing is included as well. In the second list that was put out for consultation, there were a lot of different agricultural seeds of concern. So obviously we submitted our comments during the consultation period. Our position generally is seed should not be tariffed. We have a very complementary relationship with the U.S. when it comes to seed trade. Luckily, that secondary list was not implemented, not saying that it couldn't be in the future. But right now we still have significant concerns with canola seed being on that first list. And those concerns are really going to, come to a head here in a couple of months, when canola seed is harvested from the Pacific Northwest in the U.S. To be moved up into Canada to be used for domestic canola production.
To what extent is our canola seed market here in Canada supplied by production from the U.S.? If you can put some numbers to it, or just even ballpark kind of rough estimates.
Sure. So I think, anyone who doesn't know about the intricacies of canola seed production may say, why is that a problem? We produce so much canola here in Canada, right? We are the land of canola in Western Canada. And yes, that's true. But the seed production system of canola is sensitive, and it has different needs than commodity canola production. So we produce about 70% of the seed that we use domestically in Canada. We produce about 25% in the US, and another 5% comes from South America, mainly Chile. And the reason why we have seed that's coming from the US at 25% is a pretty significant level. I think most people would be surprised to hear that we do source that much. Is that, there's only so much land in Southern Alberta, and Southern Alberta is a great environment for producing canola. But much of our canola production is traded, not traded. So, some of those traits are regulated traits, and there is a requirement for seed production for seed plots to be isolated from any other canola production plot. So that isolation distance really does limit the number of acres that can be put into seed production. Another factor is seed production is vulnerable to environment. So you need to make sure that you have quality seed and it germinates at the end of the day. And if it's, too hot, too rainy, etc., you may lose some of your production and not be able to sell it as seed. So many companies will spread out the risk across the Pacific Northwest as well, to make sure that they are able to have adequate seed of the right quality when it comes time for farmers to plant their crop.
Okay. So the Canadian government, Lauren, has granted exemptions elsewhere, and there is kind of this narrative out there, at least there have been some reports about how the Carney Liberal government has quietly backed off on a lot of the counter tariffs, and that they aren't affecting as many things as originally said. What's the possibility of a reprieve, or what are the next steps in terms of that process, and what's the likelihood, I guess, of canola seed and other seeds that are potentially affected by these 25% tariffs having a reprieve from them?
So obviously, we've had a lot of uncertainty. It's a very volatile time. The discussions that are being had at a very high level. So, we've been told that the tariff lists, if any changes are made to the existing tariff lists, it'll be done because of discussions between the U.S. and Canadian trade delegations. So, we're not going to see that canola seed HS code quietly erased from the list. If that still saying if that's a possibility, sure, we'll take it. But I don't think that's going to happen. There is a remission framework that's a possibility, and we are encouraging members who are impacted to submit into the remission framework. But, that being said, anything could happen in the next 30 days. Prime Minister Carney has already signaled that he wants to get back to the table and discuss tariffs within the next 30 days. So obviously we're hopeful that we'll resolve these concerns. As I mentioned, trade of seed between the US and Canada is very complementary. Canada imports and exports about $500 million of seed each year between Canada and the US. So, we don't have those trade deficits that have been mentioned previously. And because of the free trade relationship that both countries have enjoyed in the past for seed, they've built that into their production systems. So it is really important for supply in Canada for Canadian farmers to have access to the seed they need, that we're able to access the US market without adding any additional cost to seed.
Okay. It does feel like the general conversation when you talk to people in trade-affected industries is that, tariffs haven't been as bad as what we thought they could be, or as bad as they were the first couple days when we paid a tariff for a couple days and then it was exempted due to USMCA or CUSMA exemptions on the US side, that type of thing. Do you feel that this has kind of been lost in the shuffle in terms of the maybe the political pressure to remove these counter tariffs isn't what it would have been earlier because that narrative exists?
Yeah, I think so. With the CUSMA exemptions on the U.S. side, most of the seed that we produce in Canada that we move to the U.S., we haven't had a problem with it because you can fairly easily prove that Canada is the country of production. But on this canola piece, there's a few factors. So, there's that piece where everybody got really excited about we were moving seed into the U.S. It's going to have a 25% additional tariff tacked onto it. But I think there's also timing. So many of our members, they watch the news and they look at Twitter. They knew that tariffs could be coming. So over the Christmas holidays and before the tariffs were implemented, they were running sort of 24/7, trying to move seed around and get things resolved before it would have an impact on the 2025 cropping year. So 2025 cropping year, you wouldn't have seen the significant impact of tariffs on the price of seed or the availability of seed. Now, as the tariffs, as we continue to move through the calendar year, we're getting closer to when seed would need to start to move for the 2026 cropping year. So I think everyone was sort of paying attention to, what's moving into the U.S. and what could additionally be added other than canola. And then, when that wave was sort of over, now we're kind of back to, okay, well, what is going to impact us for 2026? So the longer the tariffs go on, the seed wouldn't have already moved. So we're going to feel the impact if something doesn't change within the next month or two.
Okay. So, and I guess that leads me to my next question. How is the market? How are these companies adjusting? The crop is obviously in the ground. The seed production cycle is well underway. Are they adapting production plans, pricing? I guess that who's bearing the cost of the tariff potentially, and I guess how's the market adjusting to the possibility of this tariff on the 2026 seed production?
I think each member is going to try something a little bit different. Obviously we do have production in Canada, and we'll see how far that gets us. We are hoping for change, though. I think things have been so volatile, and maybe we're hoping for that volatility that it'll actually work in our favor over the next few months. Certainly Seeds Canada has been talking to the Department of Finance, Department of Agriculture, international trade, making sure that everyone understands the significance. And I think for their part, they do. They are sympathetic to this, and I don't think it was a situation that they intended to have happen. But we'll see. I guess we'll see. I think farmers, in the canola industry as a whole, are getting hit from either end now, because we have the Chinese tariffs on oil and meal, and what will be the impact of demand for canola production as we go along. And then there will be the seed side. So just a lot of uncertainty, which is really not a great condition for anyone's business, but for farmers and the seed sector, it can be especially damaging.
Mm-hmm. Of course, in concept, the idea behind Canada's counter tariffs is to affect American businesses. Are you hearing, or is there discussion on the American side of the border about the impact of these tariffs on canola seed production stateside?
And I know most of our companies that are working in canola do have operations on both sides of the border. So most of the production is moving up into Canada. We still dominate in terms of canola production. So the Canadian seed or the American seed industry, is very much in line with the Canadian seed industry. We both really want to see the free trade relationship that we have enjoyed in the past continued. No one is trying to one up the other and trying to, push a bunch of American seed into Canada. That's simply not happening. The seed trade, it's global. Canada cannot produce certain species of seed. So, we have to source from all over the world. So it's seed trade. It's absolutely critical to food security. and to the ongoing success of Canadian agriculture that we do have free and open trade.
All right. Finally, then, Lauren, what's next, or what's our best hope for resolution on this? Is it a political solution at the highest levels? Is this something that if we see an agreement of some form between Prime Minister Carney and President Trump, that we should be asking this question if these tariffs have been lifted?
You know, that one is incredibly hard to predict, and if you're able to predict what's going to happen there, I think you should probably be have a much larger global platform, Kelvin.
I'm not able to, so.
Well, me neither. I think there are some avenues for our membership to explore, and that does include the remission framework. Things are already, they're in the ground now, and trying to sort things out in future years is going to be difficult, but it may need to be looked at. I personally don't think things are going to extend into future years. We're coming up to a CUSMA review here in January 2026, so we're going to start conversations in the coming months. So I think that there is going to be resolution. Unfortunately, canola happened to be a victim in a much larger plot. So I think government resolution in the long term, but in the short term, we're hoping for some relief through a remission framework if possible.
All right. Okay. Well, we'll certainly stay tuned and keep in touch, Lauren, on this file as it continues to unfold.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Of course, we would love to get your feedback on that issue or anything else that we talked about on today's show or the conversation just now with Lauren Comin. You can, of course, call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147, or send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Tomorrow, we've got, of course, the Farmer Rapid Fire brought to you by Pioneer Seeds Canada. And Friday, we'll have our RealAg Issues panel as we always do. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. Cheers, everybody.